By the time Wade Mercer saw the motorcycle leaning crooked against the guardrail, he had already decided he could not afford one more delay that day. Cold October rain had been coming sideways across northern Kentucky since noon, needling the windshield of his 16-year-old Silverado and turning the shoulders of Highway 42 into strips of brown mud. The heater only worked when the truck was moving faster than 40. The fuel gauge had been sitting on empty long enough to make him nervous, and the clock on the dashboard said 4:11. Ruby's after-school program closed at 5. The woman who ran it had been patient with Wade's late pickups twice that month, but patience did not pay overtime. In the passenger seat, 8-year-old Ruby Mercer sat wrapped in her purple coat with a library book open on her knees and her new glasses sliding down her nose. The left lens was held in place by a tiny silver wire Wade had twisted around the frame after she stepped on them that morning. I had promised he would take them to the optometrist on payday. Payday was Friday, assuming the contractor who owed him $700 finally answered his phone. "Dad," Ruby said, peering through the wet glass, "that lady's waving." Wade had seen her. A dark red motorcycle sat on the shoulder with its hazard light blinking weakly, and beside it stood a tall woman in a black riding jacket, one hand raised against the rain. A black SUV swept past her without slowing, then a delivery van, then a sedan. Wade tightened both hands around the steering wheel. He had spent the morning beneath a refrigerated loading dock replacing a seized roller on equipment older than he was. His jeans were damp from the knees down. His right shoulder throbbed from lifting a steel panel alone because the property manager had refused to pay for a second man. He wanted nothing more than to pick up Ruby, buy a can of tomato soup, and go home to the little duplex where 3 buckets waited beneath 3 different leaks in the roof. "You always say people should stop when it's safe," Ruby said quietly. Wade glanced at her. She did not accuse him. That made it worse. He exhaled through his nose, checked the mirror, and eased onto the shoulder. "You're going to make an expensive adult out of me someday." Ruby smiled. "I'm already expensive." "That you are." He parked 50 feet ahead of the motorcycle and left the engine running so Ruby would have heat. The woman did not approach him. Wade respected that. She kept one hand near her jacket pocket while he walked back through the rain, boots splashing in shallow water. Up close, he could tell the bike was not some weekend toy bought on a whim. It was an old BMW R90, beautifully restored, cream tank with thin black pinstriping, polished engine cases, leather saddle darkened by rain. Whoever owned it had either spent years caring for it or paid somebody a great deal of money to pretend they had. The woman took off her helmet. Wet auburn hair clung to her face. She looked somewhere around 40, though there was a controlled stillness in her expression that made age difficult to guess. "I called roadside assistance," she said before he could speak. Her voice was calm, educated, and slightly breathless. "They said 90 minutes. Wade looked down the highway. Dusk was already gathering beneath the storm clouds. 90 minutes in clear weather. He crouched beside the motorcycle. "What happened?" "It started missing about 3 miles back. Then the lights flickered. I pulled over before it died completely." "Good decision." He looked at the instrument cluster. "Try the key." She turned it. The neutral light glowed, faded, then glowed again. "Battery?" she asked out. "Maybe, maybe not." Wade opened the side cover and ran 2 fingers along the cable. His hands were black around the nails, scarred across the knuckles, roughened by years of solvents and winter work. "You carry tools?" "Under the seat." She unlocked the compartment. Wade found a tidy factory kit wrapped in cloth. He used the small wrench to loosen the terminal, then tugged the cable. It shifted farther than it should have. "There's one problem." "One?" "Let me disappoint you slowly." He cleaned corrosion from the ground connection with the blade of his pocket knife, tightened it, then followed the harness beneath the seat. Halfway toward the coil, he found a section of brittle insulation pinched beneath a metal clip. Rainwater had worked into the damaged wire. He pulled electrical tape from his own jacket pocket and wrapped the section carefully. "This isn't a permanent repair," he said. "It's enough to get you somewhere warm if the charging system hasn't been damaged." The woman watched him work with an intensity that made him aware of every movement. "You do this professionally?" "I fix whatever somebody is willing to pay me to fix." "That sounds professional." "Depends who owes me money." He tightened the final fastener and stood. "Try it." The old boxer engine turned twice before catching with a deep, uneven pulse. The headlight brightened. Wade listened, bent near the engine, then raised his thumb. The woman's shoulders relaxed for the first time. She shut the bike off and reached inside her jacket. "What do I owe you?" Wade already knew what was coming. People with expensive machines nearly always asked the question, as if every decent act came with an invoice attached. She unfolded several bills from a slim leather case and held out 200s. Wade almost laughed. "Put that away. You stopped in the rain. You fixed it. I tightened a ground and wrapped a wire, and saved me from standing here until dark. Then someday you stop for somebody else." She studied him. "I would rather pay you. I'd rather you didn't." Something changed in her face, not anger exactly, but discomfort. She was clearly unaccustomed to refusal. "Your time has value. So does yours. We can call it even." From the truck came 3 short taps on the passenger window. Ruby had pressed both hands against the glass and was making a face at him. Wade pointed at his wrist to tell her he knew they were late. The woman followed his gaze. "Your daughter?" "One of my creditors. She's waiting for you. That's generally what daughters do when their fathers make promises." He picked up the tool roll, but in his hurry, one small 10mm wrench slipped from his wet hand and landed beside the rear tire. Neither of them noticed. Wade stepped away. "Keep the revs up for a while. Don't shut it off until you reach town. And when you get home, replace that wire properly." "What's your name?" she called as he turned. Wade looked back. "Wade, I'm Vivian." He nodded once, as though being told her name completed some small obligation between strangers. "Ride safe, Vivian." A minute later, the Silverado disappeared through a curtain of rain, taillights dim and slightly crooked, and Vivian Calder stood beside her father's motorcycle holding $200 no one wanted. 4 days later, Vivian sat on the 42nd floor of Calder Freight and Cold Chain while 12 executives debated whether 1,800 warehouse workers were an expense category or human beings. The headquarters rose above the Ohio River in a sweep of blue glass and pale stone, close enough to the shipping terminals that freight horns sometimes carried into the executive offices on winter mornings. Vivian's father, Everett Calder, had built the company from 3 used tractors and a warehouse with a leaking roof. By the time he died, Calder Freight had become one of the largest privately held cold chain carriers in the Midwest, hauling pharmaceuticals, food, medical equipment, and high-value industrial cargo through 19 states. Vivian had spent 7 years proving to bankers, competitors, and several men on her own board that inheriting the name had not meant inheriting incompetence. She could read a balance sheet faster than most people could read a menu. She could sit across from a private equity team and know from the first 5 minutes which partner had authority and which one merely liked hearing himself talk. She could tell a distribution center was underperforming before the local manager had finished his first slide. Yet for 4 days she had been distracted by a mechanic in a rain-soaked jacket who had refused $200 as if money were the least interesting thing she had offered him. The proposed automation package eliminates approximately 320 positions over 18 months, Chief Operating Officer Randall Voss said. He was silver-haired, immaculate, and never appeared to perspire. "The savings are obvious." Vivian looked at the spreadsheet projected on the wall. "The savings assume 12% lower maintenance costs. That's the vendor's estimate. Vendor estimates are written by sales departments." Randall's jaw tightened. "Our own maintenance division is already inefficient. Then fix the division before firing people to pay for machines that will need the same division to keep them running." A few directors lowered their eyes. Vivian had a way of ending arguments without raising her voice. She turned the page. No vote today. I want a full labor and maintenance analysis. When the meeting ended, she stayed behind and opened the top drawer of her briefcase. Inside lay a small, rain-spotted wrench engraved with 2 letters scratched by hand near the handle. WM. She had found it beside the motorcycle the next morning. She had told herself she kept it because a good tool should be returned. She had not admitted that she liked what it represented, something practical, worn, and entirely unimpressed by her. Finding Wade should have been easy. It was not. Vivian refused to ask corporate security to trace a license plate. The idea felt invasive even to her. Instead, she searched the business name she vaguely remembered seeing on the side of his truck beneath a sheet of peeling magnetic vinyl. Mercer Repair. Fleet. Home. Small engine. The phone number led to a voicemail box that was full. The address listed online belonged to an abandoned service station in New Albany with plywood over 2 windows. She almost stopped there. Then on Saturday morning, while picking up the BMW from the shop that had properly replaced the damaged wire, Vivian drove across the river and found the old station. Around back beneath a corrugated awning, Wade was repairing a church van while Ruby sat on an overturned bucket doing multiplication homework. Vivian parked across the lot. Wade saw her immediately. He wiped his hands, looked at the BMW, then at her. His expression was neither pleased nor alarmed, mostly confused. It broke again? No. Vivian reached into her pocket and held up the wrench. You left this. Wade looked at it and then at her. You came across the river to return a 10mm wrench? A good 10mm wrench is apparently valuable. I did some research. Ruby burst out laughing. Wade's mouth twitched. That one came from a set my mother bought me when I was 16. Then I'm glad I brought it. He accepted it carefully, and Vivian noticed that his face softened at the engraving. She marked every one because I kept leaving tools at friends' houses. Sounds wise. She generally was. Ruby looked up from her worksheet. Are you the motorcycle lady? I suppose I am. Dad said you had a fancy old bike. Wade cleared his throat. I said it was well restored. You said fancy. Vivian smiled before she could stop herself. Your father has strong opinions. About everything. That afternoon should have ended with the returned wrench. Instead, Vivian stayed because the church van refused to cooperate. The alternator bracket had cracked, the replacement did not fit quite right, and Wade needed a second pair of hands to hold a flashlight while he aligned the bolt. You know how? He asked, handing her the light with obvious skepticism. I can point a beam in a straight line. You'd be surprised. 40 minutes later, her expensive riding jeans were damp at the knees. Ruby had completed 2 pages of multiplication, and Wade had the van running. An elderly pastor named Reverend Ellis tried to pay him from a church envelope. Wade took only enough to cover the part. You worked half the day, Ellis protested. The van takes seniors to appointments, Wade said. Put the rest in the gas fund. Vivian said nothing until the pastor drove away. Then she leaned against the station wall. You realize you're terrible at business. Wade closed his toolbox. I'm aware. You charged him less than the part plus labor. I charged him for the part. Exactly. He buried my mother for free. Vivian had no answer. Wade latched the box. Not everything is a margin. The words landed without accusation, which somehow made them harder to dismiss. Ruby came over and held out her worksheet. I got 6 wrong. Wade studied it. You got 24 right, but 6 wrong. Then we know which 6 to learn. He crouched beside her and drew little boxes on the margin, turning multiplication into stacks of pretend engine parts. Vivian watched the girl's frustration disappear. No speech, no impatience, no demand that she become better, faster. Wade simply changed the problem until his daughter could see it. Vivian thought of the executive floor. where mistakes were hidden until they became disasters because everyone feared being the first person to say, "I don't know." The first real crack between them came 2 weeks later. Vivian had learned enough about Wade to understand why pride sat so close to the surface. He was 41. He had served 6 years as an Army-wheeled vehicle mechanic, then returned home and worked in regional fleet maintenance until Ruby was 4. His wife, Leah, had died after a fast-moving infection that began as what doctors initially believed was ordinary pneumonia. There had been insurance, but not enough. Afterward, Wade took whatever jobs allowed him to leave by 3 each afternoon. He lost his manufacturer certifications one by one because recertification courses were held evenings or weekends, and childcare cost more than the classes. The old service station belonged to a retired mechanic who let him use 2 bays in exchange for maintenance on the property. Wade made enough to survive until something broke, at which point survival became arithmetic. Vivian learned this not because he confessed it to her, but in fragments over several Saturdays when she found increasingly unconvincing reasons to return. Coffee, a question about the BMW, a box of shop rags that Calder Freight was throwing away, though Wade made her take half of them back when he suspected she had purchased them. Ruby began greeting Vivian as if her presence were normal. That disturbed Vivian more than she admitted. One Friday evening, she arrived at the station and found Wade beneath the Silverado with a transmission pan on his chest. Rain ticked against the metal roof. "Bad?" she asked. "Depends how attached I am to reverse." He slid out and sat up. "Transmission's going." "How much?" "Enough. I can have one of our fleet shops rebuild it." Wade stared at her. "No. At cost." "No. Then let me hire you for a consulting job and pay—" "Vivian." His voice stayed quiet. "No." She hated how easily he could stop her with one word. "Why?" "Because you're looking at a problem and reaching for your checkbook. That is one way adults solve problems. It's one way rich adults solve problems." He rose, wiping his hands. "I appreciate what you're trying to do. I do. But you don't get to make every hard thing in my life disappear because it makes you uncomfortable to watch." "That's not fair." "Probably not. I'm offering work. Is it work you actually need?" She hesitated. Wade saw it. "That's what I thought. We have hundreds of trucks and hundreds of trained technicians. Some of our facilities are understaffed. Then post a job. You need flexibility. Then post a flexible job." Vivian folded her arms. "You make everything difficult." Wade gave her a tired half-smile. "No, I make you say what you mean." The sentence stayed with her all the way back to Louisville. Monday morning, she walked into Human Resources and asked for a list of every maintenance vacancy in the company, every shift requirement attached to those vacancies, average time to fill, turnover, training cost, and every reason applicants had declined offers in the previous 2 years. Denise Holloway, the HR director, looked suspicious. "What are you trying to build?" "I don't know yet." Vivian sat down across from her. "But I think we've designed jobs around the assumption that workers have wives at home, grandparents on call, or no children at all." Denise leaned back slowly. "That assumption is older than this building. Then perhaps it's overdue for inspection." The review produced numbers Vivian did not like. Calder Freight had lost skilled mechanics because certification classes conflicted with shifts. Single parents quit at nearly twice the company average. Warehouse workers turned down promotions because evening training had no childcare support. Several experienced drivers had left after temporary family crises because managers had no authority to adjust schedules. Vivian spent 3 weeks meeting people she would once have known only as head count. A widowed forklift technician who brought his teenage son to the break room during overtime. A divorced mother who had declined a supervisory role because it required Saturday classes. A 58-year-old diesel specialist caring for his wife after a stroke. The company did not lack talent. It had structured itself to waste talent that arrived with responsibilities. Vivian created a pilot at the Jeffersonville Depot. Skills-based hiring, paid recertification, 2 flexible maintenance shifts, and evening childcare through a licensed local provider housed in an unused training suite. Randall Voss objected immediately. "We're a freight company, not a daycare center." Vivian looked across the board table. "We're a freight company that spent $4.2 million last year replacing employees we could not retain." "This started after you met that mechanic, didn't it?" The room went still. Vivian's eyes hardened. "It started after I examined our labor data. You wouldn't have examined it otherwise." "That may be true." Randall seemed surprised by the admission. Vivian continued, "Being shown a blind spot does not make the blind spot less real." The pilot passed by 1 vote. Wade learned about the openings from Denise, not Vivian. She called every applicant in the regional database whose prior experience met the requirements. Wade's name was there from an application he had submitted 4 years earlier. When Denise described the flexible shift and recertification program, he was silent for so long she thought the call had dropped. "Did Ms. Calder tell you to contact me?" he finally asked. Denise had been warned he might ask. "Ms. Calder approved the pilot. She did not give me a list of candidates. Would I be interviewed by people who know her? Everyone in this company knows her." "That's not what I mean." Denise softened. "Mr. Mercer, there are 12 applicants. The assessment is scored. Vivian Calder will not be on the panel." He looked at Ruby that night over grilled cheese sandwiches at their kitchen table. Their duplex smelled faintly of damp plaster. A pink plastic bucket caught water near the back door. "I don't want somebody handing me a job," he said. Ruby dipped the corner of her sandwich into soup. "Then don't let them." "That simple? You always tell me tests are just questions. You listen too much. I'm 8. Listening is free." Wade laughed despite himself. The interview was scheduled for the following Wednesday at 3:30, late enough for him to pick Ruby up first. The babysitter canceled an hour before he left. He arrived at Calder Freight's Jeffersonville Depot with Ruby beside him and embarrassment burning beneath his collar. The facility occupied nearly 40 acres beside the interstate. A disciplined grid of loading bays, white refrigerated trailers, service shops, and fuel islands. Wade had worked in places like it before Leah died. He had forgotten how much he missed the smell of diesel exhaust, hot rubber, cutting fluid, and winter air blowing through an open service door. Ruby carried a canvas tote containing homework, colored pencils, 2 granola bars, and a paperback about women astronauts. At reception, Wade asked whether she could sit in the waiting area for an hour. The receptionist hesitated. Before she could answer, a man in a clean gray shop uniform approached. Nolan Price, regional maintenance manager. His eyes moved from Wade's thrift store jacket to Ruby's tote bag, then down to Wade's boots. "You here for the mechanic assessment?" "Yes, sir. We don't usually have children on the floor." "She won't be on the floor. She can sit here." Nolan frowned. "This isn't really set up for that." Wade felt every old humiliation at once. The school secretary calling because Ruby had a fever during a job. The foreman who told him children were a personal problem. The customer who delayed payment because he assumed Wade had nowhere else to go. He nodded. "Understood. I can reschedule." "Dad," Ruby whispered. "It's okay." Nolan looked at the clipboard. "Assessments are only this week." Wade turned toward the door. "Mr. Mercer?" A woman in a navy cardigan stepped from the hallway. Denise Holloway. "We have a licensed childcare room 3 doors down. It opened Monday." Wade stopped. Nolan looked mildly irritated. Denise smiled at Ruby. "You like art?" Ruby held up her tote. "Mostly engines." "We have those too." Wade stared at Denise. "Is this because of—" "It's because 43 employees enrolled children this week," she said. "You're not special." There was enough humor in it to save his pride. Ruby squeezed his hand. "See?" 10 minutes later, Wade stood in a service bay beside 4 other applicants and a refrigerated trailer whose cooling unit had been logging intermittent shutdowns. Nolan explained the exercise. They would inspect the unit independently. document likely causes, and recommend a repair without replacing parts unnecessarily. One applicant had current factory certifications and a shirt embroidered with the name of a large dealership. Another talked loudly about 20 years in diesel. Wade said very little. He listened to the unit, he checked voltage, he studied the fault log. The shutdown happened only under road load, not while parked. 3 prior inspections had replaced sensors. Wade crawled beneath the front frame rail and found nothing. He asked permission to raise the suspension, then lower it. Nolan watched impatiently. Looking for what? Movement. The refrigeration unit is above you. The wiring isn't. When the suspension settled, a harness shifted against the edge of a mounting bracket. Wade reached behind it and found a worn patch no larger than his thumbnail. Copper flashed through the insulation. The wire did not short, while the trailer stood level. Under load, frame flex pressed it into the bracket, cutting power to the controller for fractions of a second. Wade stood, wiped his hands, and wrote 3 lines on the assessment sheet. Reroute harness, replace damaged section, install abrasion sleeve and revised clamp position. Inspect matching fleet units for same contact point. Nolan read it twice. That can't account for all the failures. Wade pointed toward the fault history. It doesn't have to account for all of them. It accounts for this one. We already tested continuity, stationary, and replaced the controller. Controller probably wasn't bad. A technician at the next bay looked over. Nolan's face tightened. You're making a large assumption. Wade nodded. Then start the unit and load the suspension. They did. The fault appeared exactly when the frame settled. For several seconds, no one said anything. The dealership mechanic folded his arms. Nolan stared at the harness, then at Wade's assessment sheet. The silence was not triumphant. Wade did not smile. He simply handed the flashlight back. Vivian arrived at the depot 20 minutes later for an operations review she had scheduled before learning Wade's assessment date. She saw him through the glass wall of the conference room, sitting alone with a paper cup of coffee while the hiring panel scored results. His work jacket lay folded over his knee. He looked tired, self-contained, and deeply uncomfortable in a building that carried her name on every wall. She did not go to him. Instead, she entered the conference room and asked Nolan about fleet refrigeration failures. He launched into an explanation of the newly discovered harness defect, describing it as though the maintenance team had identified it collectively. Denise, seated at the table, said, "One of today's applicants found it." Nolan paused. "Yes." "Which applicant?" Vivian asked, though she already suspected. Nolan glanced toward the glass. "Mercer." Randall Voss, who had driven over for the review, followed his gaze. Recognition passed across his face. "That's him?" Vivian's expression cooled. "That is a candidate." Randall leaned back. "Convenient." Denise closed the scoring folder. "Not particularly. His written score was second. Practical diagnostics was first by a significant margin. Panel average puts him first overall." Nolan shifted in his chair. "There are concerns about current certifications." "The position includes recertification," Denise reminded him. "That is the point of the pilot." Randall looked at Vivian. "So we hire your roadside mechanic and everyone gets to pretend this is objective." Vivian's jaw tightened, but she did not defend Wade emotionally. She turned to Denise. "Would he have ranked first if I had never met him?" "Yes." "Would the panel hire him if I opposed it?" Denise considered the question. "Based on the rubric, yes." Vivian looked at Randall. "Then my opinion is irrelevant." Wade received the offer 2 days later. He accepted only after Denise emailed the scoring summary and the same benefits sheet sent to every finalist. The job paid enough to replace the transmission, repair the duplex roof, and stop choosing which bills could be late without consequences. The shift ran 6 in the morning to 2:30, allowing him to collect Ruby himself. Calder Freight paid for his recertification, but he had to pass the exams like everyone else. On his first morning, Wade parked the battered Silverado between 2 late-model pickups and sat behind the wheel for nearly 5 minutes. Ruby's school photo was clipped to the visor. Leah's old wedding ring hung on a cord inside the glove box where he had put it after he stopped wearing it 3 years earlier. He touched the edge of Ruby's picture. "Don't make a fool of yourself," he whispered. Then he went to work. He was good at it, not brilliant in the cinematic way people imagine talent, but disciplined, patient, and difficult to fool. He listened before replacing parts. He asked drivers what they had felt, not merely what warning light had appeared. He wrote down recurring failures. Within 6 weeks, his inspection notes led to a change in how the company secured wiring on 74 older refrigeration units. Nolan stopped watching him like a charity case. The other mechanics stopped calling him Calder's guy after Wade stayed 4 hours late during a snowstorm to help recover 3 loaded trailers of insulin bound for hospitals in West Virginia. Vivian kept her distance. That surprised Wade. She did not visit his bay. She did not arrange lunches. She did not appear outside Ruby's school or use the new job as permission to enter his life. For almost 2 months, their only contact consisted of 3 text messages about the BMW and 1 photograph Ruby insisted he send of a science project built from discarded bearings and magnets. Vivian responded with a picture of her father's old shop manual opened to a page on electrical systems. At Christmas, Wade found a small box in the service office addressed to Ruby. He nearly returned it unopened until Denise told him every child enrolled in the childcare program had received the same thing: a $20 bookstore voucher and a handwritten card from the company. Ruby spent hers on a book about bridges. "She didn't even sign it herself," Ruby complained. "It says Calder Freight Employees." Wade smiled. "That's probably why your dad likes it." But he missed Vivian. He missed the way she asked questions like she was dismantling an engine. He missed seeing her fail to hide amusement when Ruby contradicted him. He missed watching somebody who could command a boardroom stand awkwardly beside a coffee machine because she was unsure whether $3 was too much to pay for diner coffee. Their paths crossed again in January at Ruby's school science night. Vivian had been invited by the principal to speak about transportation and logistics because Calder Freight funded a regional STEM grant. Wade did not know. Vivian did not know. Ruby attended the school. She walked into the gymnasium in a dark green suit, followed by 2 staff members, and stopped when she saw Wade kneeling beside a plywood display labeled "Y Trucks Slip on Ice." Ruby had built a miniature roadway using sandpaper, clear plastic, old toy tires, and a spring scale. "Motorcycle lady," she shouted across the gym. 40 parents turned. Vivian laughed. "Hello, engineer." Wade stood slowly. "You're the speaker?" "Apparently. You could have warned me." "I didn't know." Ruby grabbed Vivian's hand and pulled her toward the project. "Dad says weight over the drive tires helps traction, but I said tires matter more, and he said both matter, which is cheating because dads always say both when they don't want to admit you're right." Vivian crouched beside the display. "Your father does have a talent for strategic compromise." Wade looked at her. For the first time in weeks, the distance between them felt artificial. After the presentation, they walked through the cold parking lot together, while Ruby ran ahead, dragging her backpack through a dusting of snow. Vivian had spoken to the students without notes. She had told them about loading trucks with her father when she was 12, about the first warehouse computer system, crashing during a holiday rush, about failing her commercial driver's license test once because she clipped a cone. Wade had watched children stop seeing a corporate executive and start seeing a person. "You were good in there," he said. Vivian shoved her hands into the pockets of her wool coat. "I terrified 3 third-graders with an explanation of inventory turnover. They'll recover. Ruby asked me whether our trucks use limited slip differentials. She saves the easy questions for strangers." They reached Wade's truck. Snow had collected on the windshield. Vivian glanced at the rust above the wheel well. "Transmission? Rebuilt. With your own money?" "Every painful dollar." "Good. Good? I'm learning. Wade looked at her for a long moment. Coffee? Vivian's smile appeared slowly. Only if you let me pay for mine. We'll negotiate. The photograph appeared online the next morning. Someone at the school had taken a picture of Vivian laughing beside Wade and Ruby's science project. A local business site posted it under a harmless headline about the STEM event. By noon, a gossip account had cropped out the children around them and zoomed in on Vivian's hand resting briefly on Wade's arm. Who is Vivian? Calder's mystery mechanic? Within 24 hours, reporters had found Wade's employment date, the Jeffersonville pilot program, and the old business listing for Mercer Repair. One article implied Vivian had created an executive-sponsored position for a man she was secretly dating. Another called Wade a struggling handyman rescued by a transportation heiress. Someone photographed his duplex. Someone else waited near Ruby's school. Wade saw the headline during lunch beneath a picture of himself carrying 2 grocery bags into his house. His face went cold. The men in the break room stopped talking. Nolan walked over and put the phone face down. Don't read that garbage. Wade stood. I need an hour. Take it. He drove straight to Louisville. Vivian was in a legal meeting when security called. Wade Mercer is downstairs. She was already standing before the guard finished the sentence. She found him in a quiet visitor room near the lobby. He had not removed his work jacket. There was salt on his boots and anger in his eyes, but the anger frightened her less than the humiliation underneath it. He placed his phone on the table with the article open. Did your people do this? No. Did they talk about me? Not with my authorization. That isn't what I asked. Vivian held his gaze. I don't know yet. Wade looked away. Ruby asked me what kept man means. Vivian's face changed. Oh, God. A reporter followed us from school. I'll have security. Wade laughed once, without humor. There. That's what I mean. She stopped. What do you want me to do? I don't know. He rubbed both hands over his face. I worked for that job. I took the tests. I passed the certifications. I earned every check. And now people look at me and see some poor mechanic you picked up on the side of the road. I know you earned it. You know. Denise knows. I know, but my daughter gets to hear strangers say her dad was bought. Vivian flinched. Wade, I told you I didn't want to become somebody's project. You aren't. Then don't make me one now. Vivian did something that required more discipline than issuing orders. She asked, what would help? Wade stared at her. No rescue, no threats, no lawyers scaring school parents, no story about the noble, poor father you discovered. All right. If the company needs to say something about my hiring, say the truth. Nothing about us. There is no us the press has a right to. His expression softened for half a second, then closed again. And leave Ruby out of it. Absolutely. Vivian waited. Anything else? Wade's shoulders sank. I need space. The words hurt more than she expected. She nodded. You have it. After he left, Randall Voss walked into her office with a printed copy of the article. This is becoming a governance problem. Vivian stared at him. A gossip account photographed an employee's home. Because you blurred professional boundaries. Be careful, Randall. I warned you the pilot would look personal. The pilot serves 112 employees. It began because of him. Vivian rose. It began because he made me notice people this company had trained itself not to see. If that embarrasses the board, they are welcome to be embarrassed. Calder Freight released one statement. Wade Mercer had been hired through a competitive assessment. The CEO had not participated in scoring or selection, and the flexible shift program had been developed from documented retention data and was open to qualified employees and applicants across the region. No romance was confirmed or denied. No photograph of Wade appeared. His assessment details remained private. The company also asked media outlets not to identify his minor child. Then Vivian said nothing. She did not call Wade. She did not send flowers, money, or explanations. She went back to work. In February, a severe freeze settled over the Ohio Valley. Temperatures fell below zero for 3 nights. Road salt crusted the highways white, and freight schedules collapsed under accidents and mechanical failures. At 2:17 one morning, Calder Freight's largest Louisville cold storage facility lost backup power to 2 temperature-controlled zones holding nearly $9 million in specialty medications. The automatic transfer system had started one generator, but failed to synchronize the second. If the temperature rose beyond the required range, much of the inventory would have to be destroyed. Wade was called with the maintenance team. Ruby slept at the 24-hour childcare center under a blanket printed with yellow stars while Wade crossed the river in the Silverado. By the time he reached the facility, engineers from the generator vendor were connected remotely, 2 supervisors were shouting conflicting instructions, and Randall Voss had arrived in a wool overcoat over pajamas because one of the affected pharmaceutical clients was threatening legal action. Vivian stood in the control room with her hair pulled into a rough knot, no makeup, coffee untouched beside her. Wade did not speak to her beyond, "Morning," she answered, "morning." The failed generator would start but drop offline under load. The vendor suspected a control board failure and recommended a replacement that was 2 hours away. Wade studied the maintenance log and asked when the unit had last been exercised at full building load. Nobody knew. He walked outside into air cold enough to burn his lungs and inspected the fuel system, control panel, transfer switch, and battery heaters. 20 minutes later, he asked a technician to bring an infrared camera. A cable lug at the generator output breaker showed hotter than surrounding connections despite the cold. The connection looked tight. Wade shut the unit down, verified isolation, then removed the cover. Beneath the lug, oxidation had formed where dissimilar metals met. Under light test load, it passed. Under full load, resistance created heat, voltage dropped, and protection controls opened the breaker. "Clean it, replace the lug, torque it to spec," Wade said. The vendor engineer on speakerphone disagreed. "That won't explain the frequency alarm." Wade looked at the display. "Frequency alarm happens after voltage instability. It's downstream." Nolan stood beside him. 6 months earlier, Nolan might have deferred to the vendor. Now he said, "Do it Wade's way." The generator came online 43 minutes later and held. Cooling compressors restarted across both zones. Temperatures never exceeded the allowable range. No medication was lost. In the control room, relief moved through people almost physically. Randall stared through the window at Wade standing with 2 electricians beside the generator. "He was right again," he said. Vivian did not smile. "He usually is when he has grease on his hands." Randall glanced at her. "You're enjoying this. Not as much as you think." Later that morning, the pharmaceutical client's vice president thanked the team in a conference call and asked who had identified the fault. Nolan answered before Vivian could speak. "Wade Mercer, fleet maintenance technician." He said it without hesitation, without mentioning Vivian, roadside rescues, or special programs. Just a name and a job. Wade heard about it later from another mechanic. He stood beside his toolbox for a long moment, saying nothing. That was the recognition he had wanted. Not pity, not rescue, not spectacle. Work seen clearly. In March, Wade asked Vivian to meet him at the old service station. She arrived on the BMW just before sunset. The first warm evening of the year had drawn people onto porches, and the air smelled of wet pavement and thawing soil. Wade was inside the bay sorting old tools into drawers. Ruby sat on the workbench eating crackers and drawing a tractor trailer with wings. Vivian removed her helmet. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." Wade wiped his palms on his jeans. He looked strangely nervous. "I owe you an apology." Vivian leaned against the bench. "For what?" "For acting like every offer of help was an attempt to own me." "Some offers are. Yours weren't." He looked down. "Not most of them." Vivian waited. Wade continued. I spent so long protecting what little I had that I started treating kindness like a threat. You had reasons. Reasons aren't the same as being right. She considered that. I owe you one too. For what? I did study you at first. Wade's eyebrow lifted. That sounds ominous. You were the first person in a long time who did something for me without appearing to calculate the return. I wanted to understand it. And I discovered you are far more annoying than the initial data suggested. Ruby laughed so hard cracker crumbs fell onto her drawing. Wade smiled, but his eyes stayed serious. The article scared me. Vivian nodded. I know. Not because of what people thought about me. Mostly because Ruby has already lost enough normal things. Her mother. A house we had to sell. Friends every time we moved. I don't want her childhood turned into somebody else's entertainment. Vivian looked toward Ruby, who had gone back to coloring. Neither do I. And I don't want you hiding from us because I asked for space 2 months ago. Vivian's gaze returned to him. I wasn't hiding. You are a terrible liar. I run a company with 8,000 employees. That doesn't improve your lying. It usually does. Wade took a breath. Ruby's school has a pancake breakfast Saturday. Vivian said nothing. She wants you there. Ruby does? She has been extremely vocal. And you? He looked at the wrench in his hand, the old 10mm engraved WM. I'm less vocal. Vivian waited. Wade finally met her eyes. I want you there too. The relationship that followed was slower than reporters would have found useful. Vivian did not move Wade into a penthouse. Wade did not suddenly become an executive. Ruby did not instantly decide Vivian should replace the mother she remembered only in photographs and one fading voice recording. Life was less convenient and therefore more honest. Vivian came to pancake breakfasts. Wade attended a Calder Freight charity dinner once and spent half the evening hiding near the kitchen with a banquet captain who knew more about transmissions than anyone at his table. Ruby visited the company depot on Family Day and corrected a vice president who called a trailer a truck. Vivian learned that 8-year-old girls could ask emotionally devastating questions while eating cereal. Wade learned that wealthy people could be lonely in rooms crowded with admirers. Vivian took Ruby to a museum and, instead of buying half the gift shop, allowed herself to be talked into one model suspension bridge kit. Wade took Vivian fishing at a county lake where they caught nothing for 5 hours and considered the day successful. The pilot program expanded, not because it made a good story, but because the numbers justified it. Turnover in participating maintenance roles fell. Certification completion rose. Warehouse promotions among single parents increased. Calder Freight converted unused office space at 3 facilities into training and childcare rooms operated by licensed partners. Vivian refused to name the program after herself, her father, or anybody else. When the board asked what to call it for annual report purposes, Denise suggested second shift. Wade objected because the program served more than evening workers. Ruby, who happened to be eating a cookie in Denise's office that afternoon, suggested open door. The name stayed. Nobody outside a small group knew an 8-year-old had chosen it. A year after the rainy afternoon on Highway 42, Wade drove the Silverado to work with a newly rebuilt rear end, fresh tires, and exactly the same rust above the wheel wells because he considered cosmetic repairs a luxury. He had earned 2 advanced certifications and been promoted to diagnostic lead, a position Nolan recommended without being asked. The raise allowed him and Ruby to move into a small brick house with a fenced backyard and an oak tree that dropped acorns hard enough to dent the truck roof. Wade complained about the tree. Ruby named it Everett after Vivian's father, which made Vivian laugh until she had tears in her eyes. On a cool Saturday in October, Vivian rode the BMW out to the house. Wade was in the driveway changing oil while Ruby painted a wooden birdhouse on the porch. Vivian parked beside him and shut off the engine. Listen, she said. Wade did. The motorcycle idled smoothly before falling silent. No electrical problems. Miracles happen. I maintain it properly now. That's what rich people call paying someone else to remember. Vivian kicked lightly at his boot. Ruby yelled from the porch, "Are you two arguing?" Wade called back, "No." Vivian called, "Yes." Ruby shook her head with the weary expression of a child burdened by foolish adults. Vivian reached into her jacket and handed Wade something wrapped in an old shop rag. He opened it. Inside was a new 10mm combination wrench, high-quality steel, unmarked. "What's this?" "Replacement." "Mine works." "I know." She pointed to the original wrench resting on the lip of his toolbox. "That one belongs somewhere else." Wade frowned. Vivian held out her hand. "May I?" He gave her the old wrench. She walked to the workbench, where a narrow shadow box lay open beside a photograph of Wade's mother. Inside were 3 objects: his army mechanic badge, Leah's small silver locket that Ruby wore only on special occasions, and an empty space beneath a handwritten card. Wade picked up the card. It read, "The tool that started everything." He stared at it, then at Vivian. "That is unbearably sentimental." "I'm told normal people do sentimental things." "Who told you that?" "Ruby." Unreliable source. Ruby shouted from the porch, "I can hear you." Wade placed the old wrench carefully in the box. For a moment, his fingers rested against the scratched initials his mother had carved there 25 years earlier. He thought of the rainy highway, of a woman standing beside an old motorcycle with money in her hand, of the job he nearly refused because he feared gratitude would become debt. He thought of the months after Leah died, when every morning had felt like a machine he did not understand, one he kept running because Ruby depended on him to keep turning the key. He had spent years believing dignity meant needing nothing. Vivian had taught him, mostly by making mistakes and returning anyway, that dignity could also mean accepting what was freely given without surrendering yourself in return. Vivian, for her part, had spent most of her life believing capability meant control. Wade had taught her that some of the most important things in life could not be acquired, negotiated, accelerated, or made obedient through money. Trust came on its own schedule. Respect had to survive inconvenience. Love, if that was what they were finally brave enough to call it, was not a rescue performed by one person for another. It was closer to what had happened on the roadside. Somebody saw somebody else in trouble, stopped, and stayed long enough to help. Ruby came down the steps carrying the birdhouse. Blue paint streaked across both wrists. "Where are we putting it?" Wade inspected it. One side was crooked. The roof leaned left. A large yellow flower covered the front. "Tree," he suggested. "Too high." "Fence?" "Cats." Vivian pointed toward the porch post. "There." Ruby considered it and nodded. "Good." Wade got the drill. Vivian held the birdhouse steady. Ruby stood between them, giving instructions nobody needed. The evening light spread gold across the driveway, catching the rust on Wade's truck and the chrome on Everett Calder's old motorcycle, until both machines seemed, for a little while, equally valuable. Across the street, a neighbor waved. Somewhere beyond the subdivision, freight traffic murmured along the interstate. Thousands of people moving food, medicine, tools, furniture, and pieces of other people's lives toward places they would never see. Wade drove those roads every day without expecting them to change him. Vivian had spent her career controlling how things moved across them. Neither had imagined that one wet stretch of highway could close the distance between two lives built on opposite sides of the same world. When the birdhouse was finally mounted, Ruby stepped back and tilted her head. "It's crooked." Wade looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Wade. "Leave it," they said together. Ruby smiled. "I was going to." And for once, neither of them tried to fix what did not need fixing. Sometimes the strongest people are not the ones who never need help, but the ones who learn to accept kindness without believing it makes them weak. Wade spent years protecting his dignity by refusing anything that felt like charity, while Vivian believed that almost every problem could be solved with money, influence, or control. Their journey reminds us that both pride and power can become walls when we are afraid to trust someone. True dignity is not about carrying every burden alone. It is about knowing your worth even when someone reaches out a hand. And true love is not about rescuing another person, changing their life overnight, or making their struggles disappear. It is about seeing them clearly, respecting their choices, staying when things become inconvenient, and helping without expecting ownership in return. Sometimes one small act of kindness, stopping on a rainy road, returning a forgotten wrench, listening instead of judging, can quietly change the direction of two lives. So never underestimate the good you can do simply by noticing someone who needs help and choosing not to walk away. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. Do you believe accepting help is a sign of weakness or strength? And if you enjoy meaningful stories about love, dignity, second chances, and the unexpected moments that change our lives, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story.